we had gone and used the template of the um, autonomy bill and had, you remember, very well, the first thing the government did was to amend the law and create and accept the change of the 15 seats. And of course, you would have heard when we did that accusations that we had rigged the election for the PLM to win. Of course, I mean, that is the opposite would have happened. But we were certain that we were solving the deadlock. So I was not surprised that we lost, but I was a little surprised at the extent of the defeat.
And that surprise, that lack of surprise comes from, you mentioned the 6-6. So we were seeing a trend because the PNM had 12-0, then it had 10-2, and then 6-6. So there was a trend. But were there other factors that added to that?
Well, there are always factors. I mean, the biggest factor, I think, was the attempt, like, I've been around this business for a long time. And there was a piece of advice that was given to me, or us, when I was in my first attempt at being a PNM candidate. And it was given by Kamaluddin Mohammed to the newcomers. And he said to us, gathered at Balize House at the time, he said that the easiest election to win is the first one. After you've won the first one, you start making enemies because people start having an expectation that certain things will be done, and it gets more personal as you go forward. And I never forget that. It becomes, after you've won 5 times, the very fact that you're looking for a 6th term, it matters not what those 5 terms were. I mean, those of us who won the 5 terms, the PNM, we would tell you how well you performed. But the bottom line is the fact that you have been there for 5 terms, that contributes a lot to, I mean, it's like people get divorced on the basis that we've been married too long. So we were under that kind of pressure. And then there were certain shortcomings that were taking place. And some of those shortcomings were within the control of the assembly, others were not. Because just don't forget, we are doing this in a period of economic decline and in the second year of a pandemic, where there aren't very many things you can do to make yourself popular. And when you put all of these things together, especially as it starts to roll out into becoming personal, it becomes more and more difficult to get a successful result. And if you look at the statistics of where the PNM was in 2013 and where we are now, you would see that we were declining. And this is basically the ultimate decline. But as you say, we in the PNM can say we've been accustomed to that. 3 times in Tobago, we had elections in the THA, 3 times, and we had 1 seat. But the key thing there is the resilience of the organization, that we serve in and out of office, and there will be a time when the people of Tobago see the PNM as the better or best choice.
You speak about shortcomings, and the people of Tobago have, and there have been discussions about whether Tracy Davidson Celestine was the suitable candidate. And my question to you is, under the Westminster system of governance, should she resign her current position based on the results that we've seen?
Well, I personally, I don't have to go as far as Westminster. I simply have to stay with the PNM, because this is Westminster in London. You are pressured out of office long before this kind of situation, because the leadership is chosen by the parliamentary peers. I was in a similar situation with Patrick Manning in 1996. And at the personal level, I fought a campaign against the establishment in the PNM, saying that we have gone to the polls, we've lost the election in 1995, and the leader decided, well, no problem, it was a difficult election and so on. But the party was mobilized to say to the leader that if you've taken the party to an election and you've lost, then you need to have the membership have a say as to whether you should continue. We called that at the time revalidation. It meant that the leader would take responsibility for having lost, you would so declare by resignation. That creates a vacancy in the organization. The person who is the leader can contest again if he or she wishes. And the membership will determine whether you continue or whether they change leadership. And that is where it was in 1996. And we had that convention in 1996. At the time, Mr. Manning didn't agree. But the membership was adamant, and enough mobilization had taken place. And it led to a very fundamental change in the PNM, which was the one man, one vote for choosing the party executive. That gave power to the membership. And that was one of the developments that took place during my tenure. That the PNM moved from a delegate system, which was heavily influenced and controlled by the incumbents, to one where the average party member could vote for the leadership. And that is what's in play now. So this is not personal to any person and any current situation. It is something that has evolved in the party, and I wish that we respect it.
So yesterday, Stanford Calendar, he's a long-standing member, he said he resigned, and he said it is also his hope that the executive of the council will do the same. Mrs. Davidson Celestine, in response, said Stanford does not have the authority to call on anyone in the executive of the party to resign, that he speaks for himself. What are your views on that position?
I hope that the PNM will not conduct its business, this business, in a way that is antagonistic. But clearly, Mr. Calendar is the chairman of the Tobago Island Council, and he has decided that he would resign. That is, I don't know that that is anything to be criticized or to make an issue of, not to mention the fact that he's an elder statesman and he has his own challenges. But he came forward very quickly, and I discovered that he had resigned, and he made the comment, nobody can command anybody to resign. But I think the context of what he was saying is that what the party is facing now is the imperative to begin to recraft its rebuilding immediately. And I think that's all that is. So I wouldn't, and of course it will draw comments from other people, and this is the season for that. So I wouldn't be bothered too much by that. But I expect that the PNM will have some soul searching, and the PNM will right its ship.
As the political leader of the PNM, I know that there's some separation between the affairs here in Tobago and the National Party itself. You mentioned the party recrafting itself. But considering the results that we've seen, 6-6, now 14-1 under Mrs. Davidson Celestine, can she be the person under which the party recrafts itself?
Well, that is not for me to pronounce upon, and I would not be giving Mrs. Davidson any public advice. I have the avenue to give counsel, and I will do it privately if I have to. I will not be engaging in any recrimination with the leadership in Tobago. But you're right, the Tobago Island Council within the PNM has complete autonomy for running its affairs, contrary to what you hear non-PNM people will say. I've seen it said during this campaign that the PNM Tobago is run by Balizi House. Nothing is further from the truth. As a matter of fact, I had to wait until they selected their 15 candidates to know who the candidates were. It was after the 15 candidates were screened here in Tobago by the Tobago executive and selected. They had their presentation of candidates. As the leader of the party, I joined them at that stage. I came to Tobago, and I came to witness the presentation of the candidates. So that level of autonomy exists. The Tobago Island Council is an executive body with real autonomy. And the head of the Tobago Island Council is an automatic deputy leader of the PNM. That is the major link between the Balizi House and the Tobago Island Council.
Let me ask you this. If you were in the position of whoever led the party to that defeat on Monday, what would your position have been following that result?
You are asking me to advise Mrs. Davidson publicly. I just told you I won't do that. I have my own challenges. I mean, that I've seen calls for my resignation as a result of this. That is what I would deal with. But I wouldn't be advising the Tobago Island Council in public like that. I mean, I think, as I said a while ago, and that's as far as I propose to go, you look at the position I took in 1996 with Mr. Manning at the national level. That brought about certain developments in the PNM. We are now running the party both in Trinidad and in Tobago at the national level and the Island Council level on the one man, one vote. Party members will have their say, they'll make their comments, officers will reflect, and I expect that. I have no doubt that at the end of the day, officers will put the interests of the party above the interests of individuals and put the interests of country above the interests of the party. That's the hierarchy.
Prime Minister, do you think the results on Monday suggest that your popularity here in Tobago may be waning as well?
What popularity I had in Tobago?
I don't know, you are a man of the soil. You've spoken about your
Well,
proud Tobago upbringing.
The soil is still there.
But one would expect that someone, a prime minister from Tobago, would have a certain level of influence. And based on the results that we saw on Monday, some may question whether or not that influence may be waning. And that's what I put it to you.
Well, I would say that I've done the best I can for the people of Tobago, for Tobago. And whatever it is, that's what it is. But the one thing I can go to sleep with and wake up with is that I've done the best I can for the people of Tobago in a very difficult situation. And if you ask my cabinet colleagues, I'm sure they will tell you that even though I represent Diego Martin West and I'm head of the cabinet, I've always looked out for Tobago. I can do no more and I've done no less.
Let's talk a little bit about how we have gotten to this point. So you mentioned some of the factors a little earlier. But when we speak to people in Tobago, there are a number of concerns that they've raised. They felt that a party that has governed for such a very long time, they felt that there was some level of complacency by the PNM in terms of how it viewed and treated Tobagonians in terms of what they would have received. Do you agree with a position like that?
Well, it's not just Tobago. I mean, if that situation doesn't arise, then a government will stay in office forever. Why do you think anybody votes a government out because it's popular? From the day you take office, you begin to have challenges of one kind or another. And of course, when you're in office for that long, like we have been in Tobago for 20 years, a large number of the young people who went out to vote and voted against the PNM have no idea, because all of their life, let's say from age 10 going forward, they believe that this is how it has always been and should be better. They can't figure out and understand that the progress that we've made, it was made by PNM doing certain things to bring us to this position. They look at the horizon going forward and they say, but why am I not a pilot in a plane? Why am I not a millionaire? Why don't I have a business? But when you're dealing with that, it is easy to dismiss the progress you've made. And that is why when you're in office for long, it's difficult to have those people see you as their savior or their first choice. Because as far as they're concerned, you are there and you have done nothing. But the older people wouldn't know that we have made considerable progress. And we did that largely because we had an orderly arrangement which was checked every 4 years. And during that period, the PNM was successful 5 times in being returned to office. So I wouldn't make that the issue. The issue is where do we go from here? Going forward, and the PNM has to pick itself up and make itself relevant in the years ahead.
I wanted to just touch on one point before we do that, because that's one of the issues we want to speak about, as well as the relationship with the new and the incoming THA. But as a political party with so much experience, you mentioned, for example, the issues of young people. That's something one would have assumed that the party would have anticipated, heading into its governance issues and so on. I wanted to ask specifically, though, about what was the party's strategy, if you are aware, from January to now? Because you had a 6-6 result. What was its strategy to try to reverse some of the ground that it had lost during that time? Because it was not successful.
Well, there was not one. A strategy usually comes in many strands. The 6-6 result, you had 6 people who became incumbents. In hindsight, no one could say, well, maybe they shouldn't have been put back. But it would have been nonsensical to have been in that situation and people who had won 9 months ago say, okay, out you go and I try somebody new. But it turned out in November or December that those people got lost. It meant that the decline continued. And a campaign is not a stagnant thing. People are changing their minds along the way. And I have no doubt that it was difficult for the PNM people because those who are advising us know as to what we should have done and what we should have done. They made it quite clear that the situation of holding until the next election was a holding arrangement. That was a bit of a lame duck arrangement, twilight arrangement. It took, 11 months to get cleared up. But in the meantime, the politics, if I may make a comment to answer what you're probing at, I think the PNM needed some more politicians in Tobago. We had office holders, and it's very easy to not make a distinction between office holder and politician.
What would have been the benefit in your?
If you are in fact a politician, you would be more concerned about the political effect of your existence. If you're an office holder, well then you might then take for granted that you are influencing people when you're not. And we are in transition now in Tobago, and I trust that there'll be some rectification to that. And organization that will have to analyze them, accept the reality of the situation, get your toolkit and start rebuilding. And one thing the PNM has shown is a capacity to rebuild whenever we're down, at the national level or at the Tobago level.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about something that was raised by the PDP on the campaign trail, which is the way that you speak to the people of Tobago. I think one of the PDP reps said it was bullying almost. And I wanted you to comment on whether or not you felt that there may have been condescension in the way that you speak to the people of Tobago, and could that have had an impact on the party itself?
It is easy to describe what you don't agree with in that way. I went on the campaign in Tobago. Excuse me. I came out twice in this campaign in Tobago. Once, I came to the party when the candidates were presented. As leader of the party, I came to the presentation, and much of what I said there was congratulatory of our team. After I came out, I came to the Mason Hall meeting in support of the candidate in Mason Hall and the party at a wider level. And I made some very firm observations and cautions. Those observations and those cautions remain. I made them firmly. If whoever is observing on the other side call that bullying, well, but they were very clearly made, very firmly made, and they remain intact. One was that Tobago will always be better off as part of Trinidad and Tobago, and no tomfoolery about Tobago removing itself from Trinidad. I was pleased to see Mr. Augustine saying that there's no issue of Tobago seeking any aspect of separation. So we can put that to bed. The other one is that we will spend public money in Tobago in the context of the appropriations made by Parliament. That was in the context of the entreaties to the electorate to expect payments of public money in ex gratia payments as an inducement during the election. I spoke to that. And thirdly, I spoke about the relationship being governed by the laws of the day. Those three things I said very clearly, and if those points, as they were made, are deemed to have been bullying people, well then, so be it. I simply want to make it clear that those positions remain even after the election, or more so now. I am already taken aback to see that the first issue that we're having is one of whether the law is being observed or not. We start off on that foot, but early days yet.
Well, the Attorney General has written expressing, I think, what the law says and putting it to the incoming council that they have to make a decision about Mr. Watson Duke and whether or not he can remain as PSA or not. I think in asking that question, it was not necessarily about the what, but it was in some cases about the how. And when we spoke to people here in Tobago, they felt that the how needed some reconsideration.
I mean,
the way in which it is communicated.
Listen, I have been around, this is 40 years I've been in politics. 40 years. I first contested an election, general election here in Tobago in 1981. 40 years later, you're telling me about changing my approach to speaking to people in Tobago? If after 40 years, then change now? I have always respected the people of Tobago. I have always spoken to them clearly. My style in the politics is that I don't pussyfoot in saying what I have to say. I say it very clearly. I don't speak ambiguously. Of course, my opponents or those who don't agree, you don't have to agree with me. But if you are describing and making recommendations to me that I should not say these things, one, or I should not say them so, well, it's the only way I know. I have never insulted anybody on the political platform today. I have never insulted anybody in the political arena. I've taken issue. I've responded to issues. I've raised issues, and I'm usually always firm in my positions. It doesn't please everybody.
Let's talk about the relationship moving forward with the incoming PDP-controlled THA. So the PNM and the PDP have very different views on how Tobago should be run. You've made some very strong statements about Watson Duke, the leader of the PDP, on the campaign trail in terms of his capacity, allegations against him that are currently being addressed in the courts. How do you see that impacting the relationship moving forward with THA?
It doesn't change anything as far as I'm concerned, but the people have chosen who they want to represent them, because remember, it's all about representation. There's no ownership and there's no permanence in these situations. It's a representation that comes up for review every so often. And that is where younger politicians should be a little less enthusiastic about the results, because you do come up for review periodically, and there's no permanence in these situations. The ultimate position is that the people Watson Duke was elected in Tobago 3 times. Right? It doesn't change my position, as I've said, and I guess this is what some people took offense to, and that is that a person with that kind of record will not be successful making their way in Balize House, because we don't subscribe to that. That's not going to change today. I don't expect anybody to come to Balize House with that kind of record and be successful as a PNM candidate. You may say, well, okay, we're going to lose the election for that. But we are an organization that has certain principles that we stand by. We don't adjust and shuffle those cards to suit people. And that's why we've lasted 65 years.
The people of Tobago, based on their results, seem to think differently, right?
Well, it's a freedom, it's a free country. That's why I said democracy is alive and well, contrary to what some people were being saying. It's a freedom. People are free to choose their representative, and they've done so. That does not prevent me from saying that your representative falls short of the standards that we expect.
There is a concern that has been raised. Some people have raised it. It's been raised on the political side as well, whether or not central government will penalize or victimize Tobago.
That is
Can you give assurance?
That is speculation that has no basis. Speculation that has no basis. As a matter of fact, running out of something to grab onto, there are people setting the stage for that. I happen to run a government in Trinidad and Tobago, and I know of no intention to penalize anybody. And I know that at the level of the cabinet, we bend over backwards to accommodate so that things can happen for the people. We get drunk with the THA results. The two people who Tobagonians elect to represent them in the government of Trinidad and Tobago in the parliament are PNM members. Don't forget that. I see some people conveniently forgetting that. In fact, some were ridiculous enough to say that those two members should now resign their seat because the THA election went some way. We don't get involved in stupid talk. The two people who represent Tobago in the parliament and in the government of Trinidad and Tobago are PNM representatives. And that is where that story about penalizing the two PNM representatives of Tobago, they have a responsibility, they have a duty which they carry out without fear or favor to represent the people of East and West Tobago. That's all I can tell you.
Do you believe the results of Monday may make it difficult for them in an upcoming general election?
It probably would, because once people get accustomed to voting against you, it's easier to do that. But it is for the people of Tobago to determine who they want to represent them. I am not going to be here speculating and trembling about what's going to happen in 4 years' time. Right? But the PNM, I expect, will always be here, giving the people of Tobago and Trinidad and Tobago an option, the best option to choose our candidates. And that is where it is. It's a freedom of choice. And we haven't been chosen to represent Tobago in the parliament. We're not giving that up, and we're not taking that responsibility lightly.
How much of a wake-up call was Monday's results for you and for the PNM?
Well, it is, as I said earlier, I mean, we are down now, very far down, and it is a requirement to pick ourselves up and rebuild to be in a much better position.
Will this be your last THA election as Prime Minister?
I don't know. I don't know.
Or as political leader?
I don't know. I'm not one of those who claim to be able to see around the corner. But I'll tell you one thing. While I have the responsibility for managing the affairs of Trinidad and Tobago, I will do that. And I'm not here making any forecasts as to what it means around the corner. Or
I asked this in the context of what you said on the campaign platform back in 2020, in terms of you not seeking another term, running for office again in terms of Prime Minister.
Maybe I was still around the corner.
Is that position still the same?
My position, I have a duty to discharge, and I will discharge that duty as long as I have it to discharge.
I don't know that the question specifically is answered in that. Are you still, that position that you took then, are you still standing by that position?
When I have something to tell you about that, I'll let you know.
The leader is.
When I have something to tell you, I will let you know. All right? But you know, I usually ensure that I don't have to, you know, disown any position that I've taken. But the future is very, you know, it's difficult to take the future on board sometimes. Nobody knew that we'd spend 2 years in a pandemic. I don't know how much longer this is going to go. Winning an election in 2015, I don't know that any pundit predicted that it was going to be a pandemic multiplied by economic decline, both worldwide and locally, and we'd be fighting out of a drum, getting out of a galvanized drum. That's what it's like. So, you know, let's, while not living one day at a time, we see the future as ours to grasp and to hold.
Okay. I guess closer to maybe 2025, we can put that question to you again. Might get a more.
Sure. I mean, even if you don't put it to me, it's going to put itself to me. I mean, right?
Fair enough. What do you see, or what do you want to be your legacy here in Tobago, in Rowley, and in Trinidad and Tobago?
I really have not identified any special legacy, but I would like to leave office where, upon reasonable reflection, those whom I serve, both in Tobago and in Trinidad, would be able to say that my presence was contributory, that I was able to contribute to national development. This is a period where we are having to do certain things because it is required to have those things done to put the country on a better footing. And I do so not only trying to please those who have access to the newspaper, the television, and the microphone, meaning the adult population that, you know, is either, you know, who can talk because they have not been properly briefed. That's one good basis to talk. Or that they are not prepared to face reality. That's another good basis. Or they personalize national development, where if I don't personally have it, nobody else is having it. I keep my eye focused on the children of Trinidad and Tobago. What does the future hold for them? And I want to repeat that. As Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, making decisions today, which have to be made today, I am exercised by what does the future hold for the children who will claim Trinidad and Tobago as their home 15 or 20 or 25 years from today. The same way I made reference a while ago to you about the young Tobagonians who for the last 20 years, all they've seen was P&M progress in Tobago and they figure it's not fast enough. Fine. But there's a generation of people now who 20 years from today, this country is going to have to say to them, I can take you where you want to go. For example, I saw government come and go with the Petrotrin problem being the can that is being kicked down the road, largely because it was too grimy to deal with. As a government that did not have an option, which was available, that would have caused no pain, we had to fix that Petrotrin problem. We fixed it. We have fixed the Petrotrin problem. Of course, you still have people bleating about the refinery being closed. But the refinery having been closed, our business in oil is now profitable. Rather than look at a balance sheet that says that we're going to be losing $5 billion, I'm looking at one that's saying that we're making $2 billion a year. We must be better off with that. The people who were sent home at Petrotrin, they took with them $2.7 billion in cash. So you got to balance those things. And then, of course, I'm going to Parliament this week, leading out the Parliament government this week. We're going to put in place a revenue authority. Of course, there's resistance to that. The revenue authority is meant not to add taxes to anybody. It is to collect the taxes that are due and to collect them in an efficient manner. Of course, there are some people who find that that's a problem, but the majority of citizens will benefit from a better collection where every person is paying what they have to pay according to the existing tax arrangements, and that is being done efficiently in a way that will benefit all of us. So those are the kinds of things that you have to make decisions and fix these national problems. And if you talk about legacy, those are the things that will mark the period when I had responsibility for the government of Trinidad and Tobago.
I want us to touch on some of those issues you raised, but before we close off on the THA election issue, there were these two other questions I wanted to get in. One, can you tell us how much money was spent on the campaign for the Tobago House of Assembly election?
I couldn't tell you that. I don't have that figure. I wasn't in control of that. I told you the Tobago Council has autonomy. The PLM has a way of managing its affairs that does not give me, as political leader out of Balizi House, control of what the Island Council does. I have a rough idea as to what contribution we made in assisting Tobago as part of the PNM, but I couldn't answer that question today.
And on the issue of working with the incoming team, you mentioned your concerns about what's new, but have you thought about specifically how are you going to work with that, with the new THA to ensure that Tobago gets what it deserves in this relationship?
I have an oath of office, and I take that very seriously. I didn't get into becoming Prime Minister because somebody liked me. It's because I was selected to do a job by the population, and before you could do that job, you had to take an oath of office. And the oath said that you will act without fear, without favor, without malice, without ill will. While other commentators or advisors will have a lot to say, they have taken no such oath. So I am not going to be exercised by people who are looking around a corner to know what's going to happen down there. I have committed to that oath of office. And it is in that context that the people of Tobago can rest assured that anything that is done by the government that I lead, it will not be done out of fear, it will not be done out of malice, favor, or ill will. I give you that assurance.
And finally, on that point, if my history is correct, you will be the first Tobago Prime Minister to lead the party that loses in the THA election. Does that have, personally, particular sting to it?
I'm disappointed, I must say. I would not be honest if I told you I wasn't disappointed. I'm disappointed. But if you want me to take it personally, well, then I take it personal. But I understand it. And I'm not holding it against Tobago. As I said, people choose who they want to represent them. It's not the first time that I've tasted that in Tobago. And, I ran for Tobago West in 1981 when I was encouraged to get involved in representative politics. I was not successful, but that didn't prevent me from still persevering and doing the best that I could in the political arena, and of course doing the best for Tobago. These things are influenced by circumstances, sometimes within your control, sometimes outside of your control. And I would have preferred if we had won, but we did the best we could and we didn't get the result we wanted. Maybe the best was not good enough. The results say it was not. And again, sometimes, recently we had William Mackenzie passing on, and he had a statement he used to always make to us, and being the champion that he was, he said, you do your best and leave the rest. That's what I try to do.
All right, I think that's a good point for us to pivot a little bit to some other issues, Dr. Rowley. So COVID-19 is an important one for us to address. When you addressed the nation, I think a few weeks back, many people felt that you were coming to deal with the issue of mandatory vaccinations. Where are we in that position?
Before I answer the question, I would like to ask you, what exactly do you understand by mandatory vaccination? It's a phrase that is bandied about, but I would like to know that I'm answering the question that you understand what you're asking me.
I think there are different versions of mandatory vaccination depending on where you look. So, for example,
so when you say if I was coming to deal with that, what do you mean?
In some countries, for example, mandatory vaccination may mean that you need to be vaccinated to work in government offices. It may mean vaccination to enter government buildings. It may be broader than that in terms of if you are interacting with the public, you have to be vaccinated. I don't know how that would be managed, but there are different versions of it. So it is in that context that it's not one definition, but whether or not
okay,
the idea
you obviously are clear as to what mandatory vaccination is. So I can answer now in the context of that because I know you now know. I know that you are asking me about mandatory vaccination. Okay, now we have managed our COVID response largely on the basis of taking the population on board. Sorry, telling the population, which is an educated population that has reached all over this country. I don't know there's anybody in Trinidad and Tobago, whether you live in Platanal or you live in Icacos, right? I don't know there's anybody in this country who has not got the message from the government and from other sources that the human population is in danger of death and destruction by a virus, an invisible virus that could infect people, could damage you, make you sick, or kill you, right? Our approach is to let the population know that this situation exists, and we have to protect ourselves from it. So it was largely based on that foundation. And expect that the population will respond positively to a suite of guidelines as to how we in Trinidad and Tobago will try to protect ourselves, try to evade or cope with the infection as we are infected. Restricting people coming from, the first action we took was restricting people from coming from the source in Asia. Then when that gives us, we got some time from that, then we closed our border to people coming from everywhere. Even our nationals abroad who could have been infected and bring the virus home, we closed the border, protect them. Then we started using protocols, wanting people to use a mask. And of course, we didn't get people cooperating as we should. We made the mask mandatory. Then, of course, we discovered that you could not be congregating because that is when the virus is spreading around people. We restricted how people can gather. So those are all mandates. It was 5 people. Funerals. I had my brother's funeral here last year. We had 8 or 10 people in the church. You can't. So there were restrictions, a number of restrictions to respond to the virus. And of course, we closed down the economy. And we couldn't keep the economy closed forever. We started opening it back up. Our numbers went down in response to the cooperation of the public and doing the things that had to be done, which is the guidelines, the protocols, wear a mask, sanitize, do not congregate. And of course, the first, the virus at that stage, the early forms of the virus, the virulence was such that it allowed us to get the benefit of low numbers, relatively few deaths, and we were managing it. In that scenario, we came back out with the economy, more and more people coming out, and of course, more and more risk we were taking. And we anticipated that there would have been some increase in the infections. However, we had the Delta variant got into the country, like other countries around the world, more virulent and affecting people more. And unfortunately, by that time, the vaccination program, which is still the best program available to human beings to protect ourselves from the virus. First, we started out with not getting vaccines and the behavior of the developed countries in hoarding the vaccines, of course. But by the time we got to July, August, we had gotten over that. And by August, going into September, October, we had enough vaccines numerically. We had vaccines by choice, different brands, and so on. And we were able to vaccinate a half of the population. The other half of the population, the vaccination program was virtually stalled because the approach of having the population using the choice of being cooperative, I would say, and doing what needs to be done to give ourselves the best chance against the virus, half of the population is taking the position, one, either the virus is not that dangerous, two, I may escape it, three, even if I get it, it would not harm me, and four, doesn't matter what I do, I'm doing it on the basis that I have a right to do that. That's where we're at. So what you're asking me is whether the government will force people to do what the government thinks has to be done for the country to overcome the virus. Now, the mandate, if you tell people, as even some CARICOM countries have done, you can't come to a government building if you're unvaccinated, then that creates a certain kind of environment. Even if the government can legally take that position, it does create a certain kind of environment that a large portion of the population would now be outside of what the government's offices provide. On the other hand, if you say only vaccinated people can work, that creates another kind of problem. We have unvaccinated nurses. We have unvaccinated nurses in this pandemic. A mandate on healthcare saying only vaccinated can work means that you immediately have fewer nurses available to you. Those are the kinds of options that come with a mandate. Right? So a mandate is not simply saying, all right, the government say do so and so, and everybody come in line and do it. Remember, a mandate of that nature, you will have people who are saying, mandate or no mandate, I am not going to get vaccinated. Or you want to keep your job and you get vaccinated to be able to keep the job or to go into the office. What we have done mandate-wise is to create the safe zones, saying if you want to participate in these areas of activity, you need to be vaccinated. And the government's responsibility now is to enforce that. And we have not yet got to the point where we are saying that we will deny you certain aspects of national activity. But is that how it's going to be all the time? I don't know. Because I am concerned at the acceptance of 20 or 30 people dying every day, and that being accepted as the norm. And if we know that what is fueling that situation is the large number of unvaccinated people in the country, then the time is likely to come when it is that development that is going to cause the government to make a decision. Can we just accept every day that 20 or 30 people, or even 40 people, will die and go on like normal?
But that has been happening, Dr. Rowley, for a few weeks well. What is the threshold before we say that we cannot allow 20 to 30 people to die every day? 700 to 800 cases averaging on a daily basis increases the potential of more people dying daily. What is the threshold? What
the
is the limit?
threshold will be determined by a government that decides that enough is enough, or that we have done the best we can, and of course, we need to get better results. And you see, we have an economy that we have nursed back to operation from being closed down. That economy closure was expensive, and the government's position is that we will do everything to prevent us going back to that situation of trying to deal with the virus by closing the economy. That is the government's position. We are not going to try to deal with the virus by closing down the economy and pushing ourselves back indoors, hoping that that will give us the relief that we're looking for. The government is considering whether the relief that we're looking for is a relief that we can have from a better response in the vaccination program. And that discussion is still taking place, and the advice that we are still to get or getting from the health department is what is going to guide the government in making a decision. But we cannot just accept that we're going to go on indefinitely. You said a couple of weeks, week or two, but we cannot go on indefinitely saying that that is how the pandemic is going to pan out in Trinidad and Tobago, where we just got people dying every day until such time as there are no more people to be killed. We have to determine at some point whether the vaccination status is a status for participation that would give us the relief that we are expecting to have.
You mentioned an issue there, which is the closing of the economy. So the position now is, in light of the numbers that we are seeing, the government is not going to take a position to close the economy.
No, we are not taking that position because we have alternatives, and we also know that that is not the position that will put us in a better position going forward. And in order to have our economy servicing the population, we have to deal with the virus in a way that allows the economy to continue operating.
So in the meantime, while we decide whether or not the issue of mandatory vaccinations will be adopted, what is being done to close that gap between the levels of vaccinations that we are seeing now, because they're not where they should be, and based on the CDC's guidelines so far, we may not reach that 80 to 90% herd immunity that we're looking for. So in the meantime, what is actively being done to close the gap and get more people vaccinated while the decision is taken?
Well, we are currently, we are analyzing the situation, having experienced the last few weeks, looking ahead at the prospect of the possibility of being infected by the new virus. We are hoping that that does not become the virulent strain that it is forecast to be. But in the meantime, we have a vaccination program going, which is not giving us the result that we expect. There's one more decision to be made, and that decision is whether vaccination, right, will give us the protection that a country would have if more people are vaccinated. And therefore, the answer is yes, then the government will have to take steps to have more people vaccinated if you are going to participate in the national economy that we're trying to save.
Doctor, has there been any national polling or state influenced polling to understand why there is such hesitance? And I ask that because that data and that information can help in strategizing and tailoring the messages. One of the criticisms has been the communication behind the vaccines. It's very top-down, but not understanding some of the reasons why people may not want to take it. So you do mention some of the people who decide they don't want to take it for whatever reason, but there are people who have legitimate concerns that are not also being answered, and there aren't the avenues for them to be answered. So I wanted to get an understanding if there's been a data-driven approach to understanding What are the reasons? And then tailoring the message to those people.
Well, the message is a continuous message, and it takes a variety of forms. And also, the reason for not taking the vaccine is manifold. It's not one reason saying, okay, it came from Mexico and therefore we don't like Mexican goods, or that is causing a fever. Virtually, there are as many different reasons as there are people not being vaccinated. And many of the reasons are reasons that are discussed at length because, interestingly enough, you talk about communication. It's interesting that people know enough about the vaccine to know they don't want it, but they don't know enough to know that it can save their lives. You don't find that strange? In fact, the people who know the most about the vaccine are the ones who are saying, based on what I know about it, I'm not going to cooperate with it. It's not that I'm not cooperating with it because I don't know about it. It's the other way around, right? And what you ask about a poll, from the information that we have gathered, quite broad spectrum of information, most people are saying, you could say what you want. It is my right to decide to take this vaccine or not. That right could be based on religious grounds. It could be based on fear of something, unfair of, you would have seen last night the head of the second person in the Nurses Association. These are trained people, handling vaccines all the time with all kinds of illnesses. And the deputy head of the Nurses Association was saying last night that her colleagues who have not been taking the vaccine, one of the main reasons why they have not been taking it is because they think that the vaccine has been developed too quickly. Well, you must know quite a bit about the vaccine to come to that conclusion, right? And this is coming from an area where vaccination is their business. And, the information about how quickly vaccines have been developed in this pandemic, the information is legendary. And we will continue to encourage people to know more about it, but we don't make the vaccines. We rely on the vaccines being authorized by a larger body or larger bodies, larger populations around the world, because the information that comes to us about COVID and about vaccines and boosters and whether boosters work or not, it comes to us from other populations. And unfortunately, it is one of those situations where you have to trust the source without being able to put your finger on it or be a participant in the process. We are not a participant in the process. At one time, if you may recall, last March of this year, the vast components of our national conversation was get vaccines. It's vaccines that we need. And the vaccines are going to take us to a point of herd immunity. Where are the vaccines? When we got a large inflow of vaccines, the conversations changed to, why am I required to take a vaccine? Taking a vaccine is not something that I will want to consider. And the conversation has changed. And it keeps changing. And that conversation is at the point now where we have to decide as a population, and that will be a government decision because the government has to lead this. Do we or do we not use the vaccination and its benefits to bring the population to a landing that is safer and less traumatic than it is now, where every day we accept that a certain number of people will be killed. And those people, as you're hearing the stories coming out, most of those people are not walking about the country picking up the vaccine. It is people who are bringing it to them in their place of comfort. Many of them are elderly people who get infected by people. And right now we have people who are infected and roaming the country, either knowingly or unknowingly, and is providing a propagation of the virus that is causing those large numbers you see. The government will have to see what role there is for the government in curbing these situations.
Dr. Rowley, can we get a date for two of the announcements, or dates for two of the announcements that you made in your address to the nation? One, possibility of carnival, and also reopening of beaches for limited periods during the day. Have you decided when you would like to roll?
I did say that we were hoping that we can begin to allow people to go to the waterfront before Christmas. Christmas is 2 weeks away. So somewhere in there, we'll have to determine whether we can do that. I have a report to read and digest from the health department. It just came into me a couple of days ago, and I am currently reading that report to digest it. And also Carnival. We know Carnival days are fixed already anyway. What I did say is what we can do. I don't know whether any large-scale activity can be had, but the safe zone, the use of safe zones, now in restaurants and bars and whatever that's going on, we may want to do more of that in other areas.
Can you name potentially which ones? Can you say potentially which other areas?
Well, the public service is one of those areas. The public service, where a large number of people interact, is one of those areas. That is not currently under safe zone, but the use of the safe zone approach is under consideration, and participation in there might be one of the areas where the government can expect to influence more people to change their behavior or their participation.
Safe zones in the public service sounds a bit like mandating.
The government will have to do what is reasonable and feasible in order to give us the best protection in a pandemic. We are in a pandemic. One option that is not available to the government is to say, let the virus rage until we are all naturally immunized, because we know what that means. And that means that a large portion of the population will die, and some will survive as being immunized naturally. What the vaccination program does is to induce immunization to the population.
On the public service safe zone side, how would that would mean that you come to work if you're vaccinated? Simply.
Considerations are there.
Physically.
The considerations are there, and in due course, you saw what we did with the school children. Our children haven't been out of school for a long time. The government very carefully, we consulted as widely as possible. Some people were adamant that we must not bring the children out to school. The government took the best advice that was available, and we brought out 4th, 5th, and 6th formers. They had a full term. The school, the term ended last week. They're home on vacation now. And of course, we have to determine whether the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd forms come out to school. But just bear in mind that the primary school children have March coming. They'll be home for 2 years. Right? Those are the issues we have to focus on. Whether we can live with the virus and have the children have their education and their development, their stage development. Right? Because development at a certain stage in your life, interacting with people is part of your development. How do we get children to develop during the pandemic without overly exposing them to a risk of death or damage? And of course, did we successfully have our 4th, 5th, and 6th formers out, notwithstanding other experts who told us that it ought not to be done, it will not be done, it will be a disaster? Or do we say that it was successful and we can continue to go along that line? So these are decisions to be made, and they will be made in short order.
I wanted to just be clear before we move on the issue of the reopening of beaches. So citizens can expect, in terms of limited use of the beach.
See whether in fact we can do that without overly exposing us. And, we're not the only ones making this assessment. And we are heavily influenced by the advice that we get from the health department. And we will consider it. And we're here in Tobago now. There's no place in the country where the opening of beaches will be more effective in terms of giving people back to their livelihoods. And we want to do that. I've spoken to this twice before in the last few months. And that's why you're raising it. I did say that by Christmas, hopefully. But we will do what we can do once the risk is reasonable. Right? So I'm currently looking at that based on the advice that is coming into me from the health department, and the government will make a decision.
And on the issue of carnival, where are we in terms of?
We know we're different. What is that? We're not going to have a carnival as we know it, which is the street carnival and the hundreds of thousands of persons mixing, because that is what the virus would love. So we're not going to have a carnival which disregards the sensible arrangement. As a matter of fact, even talking about carnival in a growing pandemic, some people think is ridiculous. Well, we have not shut the door on it. We've said that because we are using the safe zone model, it may be that some carnival things can take place in safe zone kinds of arrangement, and that's as far as we can go.
I think what people wanted to understand was what that could look like specifically.
Well,
at an enclosed area, you show your vaccination card to come in. Is that what you're looking at?
Enclosed areas, you can have shows, but again, you would have to limit the amount of people and how close they are, because we still have the requirement not to congregate. And of course, you have to be masked. And of course, if you come into that enclosed area, you have to come in with the first level of protection, which is that you are vaccinated. So that is an arrangement that vaccinated people can get involved in. On the other hand, you will know that you're better off being outdoors than indoors. So they may be able to have carnival events outdoors for vaccinated people where the risk of spreading the virus is limited, because you are outdoors and you're vaccinated and you're masked and you're spaced out. So these are things that we can do. But we're not going to go much further than that. So when you talk about carnival like Juve morning and carnival bands and people winding up on one another, we're not going to have that. Okay? So let us get that clear now. Because you don't want to give the virus the opportunity to spread in the way that it will spread if we do something like that. Right? And for those who believe that carnival must be had, I just want to remind them, we are in a pandemic that is killing people every day. And your desire to whine on somebody is low down the totem pole of priorities.
We had some vaccines arrive from the US over the last 2 days. Has government firmly decided how those will be used?
Well, we are talking about the coming of the use of policy and so on, and mandates and so. The arrival of the accessing of those vaccines, which incidentally, those things expire. We have vaccines. Fortunately, the ones that we have, Sinopharm, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, the expiration is fairly long now, but they do expire. We can't be having them, squeezing blood out of stone to get them, then disregard them in a pandemic where this is supposed to be known to be the best response that a population can make. One that is having its hospitals, receiving people on a daily basis and shunting them out as diseased people on a daily basis. We have to make use of those vaccines. We try to have a mandate with our school children, and you saw the reaction. You saw parents saying, my child not been vaccinated. Now, who makes that decision? parent or the child or the government. Because the government made the decision. Eventually, we resorted to the choice, and we have unvaccinated children and vaccinated children going to school. We are now having to assess whether that had in fact increased the risk and made it unacceptable, or whether it did teach us that vaccinated and unvaccinated children could be out of school with no significant increase in the risk. That is being currently analyzed. And that's the kind of analysis that will cause the government to do more of it or less of it, as the case might be. We're not operating by VAPs. We have experience. We started with a mandate. Many people took part in it. I think it's about, out of 100,000, I think 40 or 50,000 would have cooperated. But then you reach the point where half is saying yes, half is saying no. You know, it's interesting that, you know, people are preferring to talk about bullying and talking about government being, and what's the fashionable word they use, dictatorial, when in fact it is completely the opposite. You know, we have cooperated with a population where about half of the population has been cooperating with the directives, and the other half saying, no, we're not doing that. But we have not gone down the road of the mandate. It does not mean that we will not use a mandate. We have been operating on the basis of what value, what benefit we can get, what persuasion can do, and of course, what enforcement we can logistically operate. Because there's no point in having a mandate that logistically you can't enforce. That's one of the considerations too, right?
Okay. That deals with COVID, I think. I wanted to raise another issue with you that happened this year. As we're coming down to the end, one of the biggest issues that dominated the news cycle this year was the issue of the Police Service Commission and Gary Griffith, and him no longer being the police commissioner. What is your relationship with Mr. Griffith at this point?
My relationship with Mr. Griffith? Today?
Today?
None. None whatsoever. Mr. Griffith is a citizen who had a job, a contract job, as Commissioner of Police. Incidentally, I, as head of a government, was very instrumental in bringing that about. And there's a police service commission. Well, the story of the police service commission and the management of the affairs was legendary. The bottom line is, as I've said, you know, the government would move with dispatch to ensure that there was a police service commission. The president did what had to be done. The parliament did what had to be done. There's a police service commission in place now with the responsibility to fill a vacancy of the police service commissioner. And there's a deputy commissioner as the senior officer there. We would like the commission to move with alacrity to have a commissioner in place.
Have you gotten any updates from them?
I have had no contact with or information from the new commission, but I presume that they're doing their job.
Earlier this year, you said you had no involvement. There was a conversation that someone intercepted the chairman of the Police Service Commission. You said that was not you. But did any member of your cabinet intercept?
I did not say that because I spoke. I am very careful about the words I use, and I don't want anybody saying I say what I didn't say. It was being said that the Police Service Commission took instructions from and changed lists and sent back lists and so on. I hear people talking about this, what's it called, merit list. I have seen no merit list. No person has spoken to me about a merit list. I have given no instruction to anybody about a merit list. What I did say very clearly is that information in my possession, in my capacity as chairman of the National Security Council, was pertinent information which should have been available to the Police Service Commission, and I didn't make that information available. I went as far as to indicate that there were 3 such occasions that I made what I consider to be pertinent information. And I went further. I said, as Prime Minister, if information ever comes to me which is pertinent to the job of any service commission, I will make that information available to that commission. So all who want to interpret that however they wish, they're free to do so. But that is what I have said. So if you're going to quote me, you quote that. If you're going to analyze that, I will read your analysis. But the bottom line is, we did have issues with respect to the Police Service Commission, you're not in the court. We had a judge making a ruling, all of that. The bottom line is we now have a Police Service Commission in place. And to answer your question again about Mr. Griffith, I have no relationship with Mr. Griffith. I'm head of the National Security Council. He served as Commissioner of Police. And of course, there's a vacancy there now. And if you have any qualification, you may want to apply.
I don't know that that would be my field of expertise, but I still want us to drill down a little bit on that particular issue of what happened in the President's House of the day. And I have one specific question.
But let me just stop you.
And the question
Let me stop you before you ask me the question. I might help you. Conversation between me and the President will remain confidential. I've seen accusations made based on speculation. I've seen the President pilloried and abused and disrespected. I've seen those who believe that they should know and be a fly on the wall. The bottom line is the conversations that I have with the President on matters of state will remain confidential. And I could tell you, I have not advised the President or received any advice from the President with respect to this matter. Whether you believe or not believe that is up to you.
It's not up to me.
The President had a role to play and a job to do with respect to the Service Commission. She has done that. I had a job to do with respect to the Service Commission. I have done that. Everything is in place for the organs of state to function on this matter. And I expect that they will function, and I hope that they function with alacrity.
A commissioner wrote a letter stating that a high office holder intercepted the chairman of the Police Service Commission at President's House. My recollection...
Those are your words and those are his words. But
my specific question is...
Yes, let me hear the question.
Has anyone from your cabinet, did anyone from your cabinet intercept the chairman of the Police Service Commission and provided information?
To the best of my ability, to the best of my knowledge, I'm the only person who goes to President's House from my cabinet. That's to the best of my knowledge. I'm the only person from the cabinet. So all this speculation about someone, if you want to say the Prime Minister when the President says so, but high-ranking official, I'm the only official in the cabinet who goes to President's House to conduct state business. Right? And I've said, I have given from my office information to the Police Service Commission by its chairman. Why is that so difficult to understand? What the chairman does with that information is another story. How the chairman handles it is another story. So all this fancy footwork and trying to unravel and untie something, there's nothing to untie. I have given information which I believe was pertinent. I gave that information to the Service Commission. I have been to President's House. So what is the speculation about? What the President, there's nothing to speculate about. If you want to hold it and say, I should not have given that to the Service Commission, I said, well, I don't agree. If you want to say I should not have gone to President's House, I will say that you are out of place. You can't tell me when to go to President's House. As Prime Minister, I go there as often as required. So that whole scenario, that whole period of Kankatang, I'm not joining it. As a matter of fact, with respect to the Commissioner of Police himself, I did say to the country at a press conference that we have contrary legal advice. This matter is going to be interpreted because we have a number of different legal positions. It came to pass, that was so. It got before a judge. The judge made a ruling. The government is responding to the ruling and others are responding as well. The parliament is responding. So what is the problem? I know that there are people who would like to believe and make their interpretation, a high-ranking government official. And who is high-ranking official? Say the prime minister if you wish. That doesn't change one thing as far as I'm concerned. I'm simply doing my job. I'm simply doing my job. I could tell you the conspiracy theories about this conspiracy. There's no conspiracy. It's wide open. Wide open. That we have a problem here. It has been raised. It went to the appropriate quarter. And of course, it caused certain reactions to have been made. And of course, we have dealt with it. Didn't I tell you that the president will seek to find people to serve on the commission, and as soon as those people are found, the government will ensure that they come to the parliament and the parliament deal with it? I told you so. And it has happened. And you ask me whether, in fact, the new commission has done X, Y, Z. I don't know, because I've had no contact or communication about their work. I don't know what they have done. What I do know is that there's a vacancy in the police service for the commissioner, and that commission has to deal with it.
Dr. We have to bring this interview to a close very shortly, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to reflect on your government's performance over the past year. Briefly, I know there's a lot, and also talk to citizens about what they can expect in the coming year.
The government this year, 2021 has been another difficult year for us. I mean, we were hoping that we would have gotten out of the pandemic conditions, but unfortunately the virus has been, with us, and the rest of the world. The virus has not gone away from the world. We are in a very unique situation. 2 years of managing a pandemic, having to get the human resource, the financial resources, and people being infected, and the hospital staff it's been a strain. But fortunately, it has not been worse. It could have been worse. It has not been worse than it is, but it has not been good. We have had some improvements we've opened up the economy considerably. Right now, there are only a few areas in our activities that are closed, which is primary school children, freedom of operation in the business sector. We have had restrictions in the business sector, especially in the services, but we've opened up the economy. The unopened areas, we are still considering whether we should. I can tell you that we do have the health department has its serious concerns about further opening. We didn't mention whether the use of beaches, but that's only one part of it. But we're still in a pandemic. But fortunately, we have the livelihood side, the economy, moving from a period of almost stasis to one where there's some activity. But the 2020 period, significant losses have been experienced. Some people are trying to make up those losses or restarting the economy and trying to use the opportunities. And I think we're going reasonably well. What we can look forward to in 2022, I think, is some considerable improvement. We expect some considerable improvement, as long as we are able to keep the economy operating. What I don't want us to have to do is to throttle the economy again. Once the economy is throttled, I mean, blame placing is not a replacement. If the economy is not throttled by the state of the virus in the country, then 2022 we expect to be significantly improved as of 2021. And that is why we really would have to do whatever we can do to prevent the economy from being throttled. And I'm particularly concerned about the students, the children, who are in fact carrying a mental burden, which we may not be seeing now. But I fear that when we actually gaze upon it and its effect, that it's going to be something that we're not measuring now. But as Prime Minister and as the Cabinet, we are concerned about that inability to have our children develop in the way that they normally would. And iPad home and laptop and what do you call it? The
Mobile cell phones.
no, the instrument that they being educated on.
Laptops.
Yeah, that is not a substitute for the human interaction developing. I am really, really concerned about that. I see and I hear and I observe. I'm worried about the mental stress and strain that this pandemic is bringing about. But economically, I would like to tell the population that as long as we are not beaten down by the virus in 2022, our economy should improve in 2022. Right? We have the foundation laid for that. And we are making some good strides in the agricultural sector. We're making some good strides in the service sector. And we are hoping that Tobago will be restarted, the economy here in Tobago. We'll start tentatively, maybe with a dip in the water on the beach very soon. And we hope that Tobago, ideally what I would like, because Tobago is a unit, a small unit, we should be able to have a level of vaccination in Tobago that would allow Tobago to have its economy functioning in a way that the stresses of the virus can be, if not eliminated, at least significantly ameliorated. We really need to have Tobago like a pilot project. Tobago should really be a pilot project in Trinidad and Tobago because the number is small, it's 60,000 people. But if we behave in a particular way, we could be getting the worst of the virus. It's a question of personal responsibility and cooperation. That's what it is. The government can do only so much. The government has done all that we can do in terms of getting you the response on the vaccination side. The government is following a period of, if you are infected, you stay home. If you're infected, don't spread the virus in your family. Don't spread it out on the street. Unfortunately, the nature of the problem is very personal. You could be looking at me now. You could be